I knocked up a girl at 15 and had to pay her to keep the pregnancy. She cut all ties and I took care of the kids. Now she wants to get back into our lives. When I was 15, I went to my first party and ended up losing my first time to a random girl. Soon after, I found out she was pregnant. She wanted to terminate, but when my parents found out, they were against it, and they ended up convincing her to keep the pregnancy, and in exchange, we agreed to pay her for it, let her sign away her rights, and never bother her again about the matter. And that's what happened after my twin boys were born. She signed away her parental rights, we paid her, and we never bothered her again. We were well off, so I had a nanny, and it never hindered my education. In college, when I was 22, I met my now wife, Hannah, who was 20 at the time. I instantly fell in love with her. She was beautiful, very smart, and oddly skilled with knives. She was caring, and after some time into our relationship, I told her I had kids, and she was fine with it. Later in our relationship, she met the boys, and they quickly fell in love with each other. We got married at 25 and 23, and she moved in. The boys loved and cared for her. They would nap with her, and even during her periods when she experienced bad cramps, they took turns taking care of her. They would give her lots of kisses and hugs, and I was truly happy to see my three favorite people getting along. I'm a pale man with white hair, and my boys favored that, while my wife is a dark-skinned woman. Once, my wife dropped off the boys, kissed them, and their classmates picked on them for having a dark-skinned mom. In retaliation, they claimed she was their nanny. We discussed it, and my wife chose never to accompany them to school again. My wife has always dreamed of taking a trip with her kids, a dream she's had since childhood when she went on such trips with her parents. She told me about it, and we went together to visit the place first. She hadn't seen it in a long time and wanted to make sure it looked the same as she remembered. Additionally, she wanted to avoid any trust issues since the last time she suggested a place she used to love, we ended up in an X-rated place for disabled people. She was even more excited to take the boys, and she made matching clothes for them, with the boys helping her. 5 months ago, I celebrated my 7-year wedding anniversary with my wife and posted about it. It was great until one of my kids' classmates found it and showed it to the rest of their class. As a result, my boys started getting picked on for having a dark-skinned mom. They were lashing out at my wife, saying very racist and disrespectful things to her. 2 months later, I received a call from a woman claiming to be the mother of my children, and surely enough, it was true. We'll call her Bella. She came back, expressing a desire to check up on the boys and see how they were doing. I talked to my wife about this, and she thought it would be good for the boys to meet their biological mom. They met, and a month later, my wife's trip was approaching. The boys suggested that Bella come along, but there were only 4 tickets. This trip had been planned and booked 3 years prior, making it difficult to accommodate a 5th person since most of the events had sold out tickets. My older son suggested that Bella come instead of my wife since it's a family trip. My wife started to beg and plead with them, stating that they had been planning this trip for a long time, and it was supposed to be their trip. I told the boys that Bella would not be going on this trip. The next day, I went on a business trip for 2 days. While I was away, there was a party that the boys asked to attend, but I had explicitly said no, and instructed my wife not to let them go either. Despite my instructions, the boys attempted to go, and when my wife reminded them of what I said, they told her she wasn't their mother and to stop acting like it. I reiterated that it was an order, and she couldn't let them go. The boys blamed her for their biological mom not being able to go on the trip, and long story short, one of my boys slapped her. I came home on Saturday morning, as I always do because everyone is usually home, and they all wake up early to greet me. My wife would typically be making something delicious with loud music playing, and my boys would be arguing over something before running to hug me. This time, when I came home, the house was quiet, and no one was downstairs. I went to check on the boys, and they were in a bad mood. I then found my wife in bed, just laying there. I later found out what happened, scolded the boys, and canceled the trip. They begged and pleaded with me and apologized to my wife. She said there was no need to cancel the trip since I had spent so much money on it. So, I suggested she go with Bella and the boys. She pointed out some safety concerns since we don't know Bella very well, and she's not exactly strong, so she forced me to go. While on the trip, I called her a lot, but she preferred to text. A week later, we got back and noticed the plants were dry, even though my wife prides herself on her garden. The inside looked exactly as it was when we left. I checked our house alarm system and noticed the door hadn't been opened since it closed when we left. I found my wife lying in her sewing room with all of my drinks, even though she was previously not a drinker. I also noticed all of the clothes she made for the trip had been cut apart. She continued not to speak or move for the next 2 days, so I had to bathe her, but she wouldn't take any food. After some time, she started to eat and held me back when I would hug her, and we finally talked. I apologized for everything that had happened, and she accepted my apology and forgave the boys. I noticed that in the 2 days that followed, she didn't really speak to the boys like she used to. She hadn't hugged them, kissed them, or made any cute comments about how much she loved them. A Friday also passed, and she usually has game nights, but she hasn't. I confronted her, and she told me she wasn't their mother, and her job was to make sure they were taken care of, and she wasn't hurting them in any way. It has been like that since. The house is quiet, our relationship is back to normal, and she's affectionate towards me and everything, but she's not like that with the kids. A backstory about my wife: she has always wanted kids. She specifically wanted only 2 kids because she didn't want to drive a minivan. Before we got married, we talked about having kids, and she told me she didn't want any since she already had 2 boys. I asked twice after that because I make enough, and we have a 6-bedroom house, so it wouldn't be a problem. But she gave me the same answer, telling me she already has 2 kids. Today, she told me she wanted a baby. I feel if I do agree, she will completely let go of the kids we have now. How should I go about this? Update 1. I followed the advice that everyone suggested. Here's an explanation that I didn't have before. Last school year, the boys took a trip to DC where they stayed with their friend whose uncle was dating Bella. They talked, and Bella told them how she had been looking for them, missed them, and so on. Everything was going well, they were telling her about their lives and how they live, basically sharing how well off we were. Then they mentioned my wife, and she told me how she was happy for my wife, but that she had always loved me this entire time. It's important to note that we didn't even know each other's names until my parents were involved, so discovering this was just odd. She basically told them how she has been trying to fix our relationship, but I moved on, and I guess this is where the hate towards my wife started. I arranged a meeting with Bella and the boys, and asked Bella in front of them if she wanted custody. She went on a long rant about how she doesn't have any money and wouldn't want the boys to change their lifestyles living with her. As much as I didn't want to, I showed the boys the contract she signed and told them how she wanted to get rid of them, and that we had to pay her to keep the pregnancy. I told her that since she wanted to be in the boys' lives, I wouldn't mind it, but we could have split custody, and I wouldn't pay her any child support, and the boys are being cut off financially until they can earn it, so she won't have access to my money. She agreed in front of the boys and left, saying the boys can come stay with her in DC. We haven't heard from her since, and we later found out that she's blocked both me and the boys on everything. Both boys will be going into therapy to address their issues with bullying in this entire situation, something I should have done a long time ago, I know. My wife said she doesn't hate me or the boys, but that trip is still something she wants to do with her kids. She still loves the boys and has told me how sad she feels when she sees them trying to call Bella. I know that right now, they just want to be held by her, but I don't think that's something my wife wants to do, and I'm certainly not going to make her. I'm sending her to Florida for the moment, so she can be away from this, and we can get therapy. Hopefully, when she's back, she will feel a difference, and we can move on from this for something better.